Good morning, 4th and 5th graders. Today I'm going to be reading pages 224 to 241. Last week I assigned a written response about the turning point of the story, and I talked about how good readers look for the turning point and then determine how it reveals the author's message in the book. Today I'm going to teach you how to use that good readers use text evidence to help them predict what's going to happen next in the story. And watch me as I model how I think about what I know and use that knowledge to make predictions. And notice how I use clues in the text to think about what's going to happen next. I am going to start with the quote from page 224. Tuesday, December 3rd through Friday, December 13th, 1776. Our private soldiers in your hands are treated in a manner shocking to humanity, and that many of them must have perished through hunger had it not been for the charitable contributions of the inhabitants. General George Washington complaining to British General William Howe. So this quote reminds me that without compassion of people like Isabel, many more imprisoned soldiers would have died from hunger. Lady Seymour was struck by a fever whilst visiting up in Greenwich. She had to be carried to her chamber, her skin the color of an old beeswax candle. Dr. Dessouge came to bleed her so that her bodily humors would go back into balance. When the bleeding was over, Madame saw the doctor to the door. I was dusting the grandfather clock in the front hall. Good, sir, Madame said in a low voice. I believe our aunt would recover faster at our estate in Charleston. She could sit in the sun for hours and breathe the healthful air, don't you agree? The doctor's bushy eyebrows flew up in alarm. South Carolina is hundreds of miles from here, over bad roads. Lady Seymour would be dead by Philadelphia. Which was likely Madame's intention, I thought. The doctor pulled on his gloves and picked up his bag. I doubt she'll be well enough to travel until spring. I will call again tomorrow. He tipped his hat. Good day, Madame. Lady Seymour's bell rang upstairs as the door closed behind him. Madame squeezed her lips together so tight I thought she had bit them off. Girl, she spat, go see what she wants. By supper it had been decided that I would tend Lady Seymour while she was bedridden. The master used his connections in the British High Command to secure extra firewood for the house, declaring that his aunt's bedchamber be kept as warm as the month of June. The heat of the room helped to bake out the fever in Lady Seymour's blood and ease her cough. 'Twas warm enough that I could go about in stocking feet, which was a comfort, for my shoes had taken to pinching my toes something wicked. As she recovered, the lady took to reading all of the newspapers printed in the city. Whenever she dropped off to sleep, I would steal as many sentences as I could. Thusly, I followed out the progress of the war, what was left of it. The flame of independence was sputtering and expected to burn out any day. The rebels had run out of ammunition, soldiers, and money. Mayor Matthews, him who plotted to kill General Washington, escaped from the rebel prison and returned to New York in triumph. The American Congress, frightened by the marching British, fled Philadelphia and ran to Baltimore. Newport, in my home state of Rhode Island, fell to the British too. When I read that last bit of news, I was stunned. I had not spared a thought for Rhode Island for months. 'Twas several days before I could again sneak up to the Bridewell, toting sausages, crust, and cheese rinds. The guard stole a few of the sausages and gave me only a few moments to conversate. It mattered not. Curzon was not feeling up to too much talk. I sat on the stone floor and checked the hole in his leg. It was hot, but free of yellow pus. Conditions in the prison had eased some. Folks in town had donated enough blankets that there was one to be shared between every 2 or 3 men. The British promised each prisoner would receive 2 pounds of pork and hardtack biscuit every week. They did not announce that the pork was often spoiled, nor that the men had to eat it raw, for there was no fire to cook it over. For my next visit, I saved my own helping of mince pie. I filled a bucket with potato scraps and mutton fat and put the pie on top. The guard took the pie as I had hoped. I loves a good mince pie, he said as he unlocked the door to the prison, pie crumbs spilling from his mouth. Frozen bodies were stacked in the hall waiting to be buried in the pits. The clothes had been taken from the bodies to keep the living soldiers warmer. I kept my eyes on the ground out of modesty. Curzon was still not in the mood for conversating, not even a little bit. I thought he looked feverish, but when I went to feel his forehead, he pushed my hand away. The men snickered at that. I took my empty bucket and left. Snow fell all that night. Lady Seymour prepared an errand list for me the next afternoon. She had spent the morning gazing into the fire and had not taken any food. I made bold and suggested that she eat a biscuit with honey for her own good. You need strength to get through the winter, I added. She set down her pen, picked up her teacup, and sipped the hot cinnamon water. I thought it pleased you when I left so much on my plate. Ma'am, the more I leave behind, the more there is for you to take to the prison. She studied me so close I thought she could see my thoughts. That is where you've been taking the table scraps, isn't it? My head bobbed once like a puppet's. Am I to assume you know someone confined there? I found my voice. Yes, ma'am. She sipped again and looked at me over the rim of her teacup. It is honorable to help a friend in need. How did you know? I blurted out. She folded the sheet of paper on the table. These are the items I would like you to fetch for me. Purchase the ink and newspaper at Rivington's, but not the books. He overcharges. Go to that shop near the baker on Hanover Square. Elihu said they haven't closed. I bobbed once and took the paper. Please, ma'am, I tried again. How did you know? Her gaze returned to the logs in the hearth. Take care how you go, Isabel. Many people think it is a fine and Christian thing to help the prisoners. I do not think my niece is one of them. Yes, ma'am, I whispered. So when the book said that many people, but not Madame Lockton, think it's the Christian thing to do to help the prisoners, I made a prediction. I was thinking Lady Seymour might help Isabel in her efforts to aid the prisoners. I also think that Isabel will have to be careful not to be caught by Madame Lockton, or there could be consequences. It started to snow whilst I was in Rivington's. The wind blew the snow direct into my face as I crossed the square, and I was grateful to step into the shelter of the stationer's store, for 'twas warm and dry inside, near peaceful, if such a word can be used to describe a shop. A jelly-bellied officer with thick spectacles was purchasing a tall stack of books from the man behind the counter. They were deep in their talk and appeared not to notice me. I took a slow turn around the shop, admiring the shelves heavy with books, business forms, proclamations from Parliament and General Howe, slates, thick paper, quills, and sealing wax. The books called to me. My fingers itched to touch them. It had been months since I dug into the story of Robinson Crusoe. I glanced toward the counter. The men were arguing friendly-like about a fellow named Hume. They both had their faces planted in the same pamphlet. When I trod on a squeaky board, they did not even look up. I reached up to a bookshelf and flipped my way through the books, standing at attention. The titles were near as long as books themselves. Treatise on the Propagation of Sheep, the Manufacture of Wool, and the Cultivation and Manufacture of Flax by John Wiley, or Cato Major, or his Discourse of Old Age with Explanatory Notes by M.T. Cicero, or Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral by Phyllis Wheatley, and countless tracts containing sermons and advice. My fingers backed up. Mama told me about Miss Wheatley. She was kidnapped in Africa, sold in Boston, and wrote fancy poetry that smart people liked. She had visited London and England. She had been an enslaved girl but was a free woman. I took the slim book off the shelf and opened the cover. I had never read a poem. What if I lacked the skill? What if I were caught? Might as well throw myself in the river. Bang! The closing door startled me, so I near dropped the volume. I quickly set it back on the shelf and approached the counter. Can I help you? Asked the young man who stood behind it. Yes, please, sir. I handed him the list. From the Lady Seymour. I hear she's been poorly, he said as he looked over the list. Yes, sir, but she is strong enough to sit by the fire now and has a powerful urge to read. He nodded. She's a good customer. I am glad she's on the mend. He quickly assembled everything on the list, the letters of Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, History of the Roman Republic, Volume 1, and the Expedition of Humphrey Clinker, and pulled out a large sheet of paper to wrap them in. As he worked the scissors, he paused. You know that boy, didn't you? Pardon me? He continued cutting. Bellingham's boy. Red hat, quick talker. He creased the paper with his finger. He brought you here once in May. Pointed to you out the window. Convinced me to hand over 2 fresh baked rolls. Told me you were like to die from hunger if I didn't help. He smiled at the memory. I'm sorry, sir, I said. I didn't mean to take your food. He pulled up a length of twine. You didn't. One of the advantages of courting the baker's daughter is all the bread a man can eat. He had not yet commented on my looking at the books. I feared he might try and trip me up, get me to say something I ought not, but saw no other choice than to be polite. I hope your lady is well, sir, I said. He concentrated on tying a bow. So do I. She fled with her father to a village in Pennsylvania. Place called Hatboro. They make hats there. Clever, don't you think? He tried to smile, but his eyes were downcast and melancholy. Perhaps 'tis safer there, I said. Aye, he said, finishing the bow. With plenty of young men eager to protect her, but that's a tale for another day. He kept the package in his hands, lost in thought. Master Lofton will settle his aunt's account at the end of the week, I said. Oh, aye. He gave me the package and waited as I settled it in my basket. I hear tell you are one of them who feeds the lads in the bridewell. A sizzling log in the hearth popped suddenly, and I jumped. Not me, sir. Begging pardon, but someone is mistaken. He crossed his arms over his chest and shook his head. That there mark on your face makes you hard to forget, lass. The heat from the hearth filled the room and made it hard to breathe. My eyes darted to the windows, and I fought the urge to run. It felt like all of New York was watching me. He leaned forward, put his elbows on the counter, and lowered his voice, though we were the only people in the shop. You tell them boys in the jail to hang on. There's plenty of us out here trying to help. Sir, he removed a slim volume from under the counter. This is for you. Don't let your mistress see it. I cannot read, sir, I lied. He snorted once as he quickly wrapped the book. Of course you can't. He pushed the package to my side of the counter. All who love liberty should commit the words to heart. I can't take it, I started. I cannot pay. I only have a few left, and those I should burn, he said with a wave of his hand. Read it, pass it on, and keep feeding the lads. I bobbed once and hid the parcel in my pocket under my apron. As soon as I could stand close enough to a fire, I'd get rid of it. The last thing I needed was more trouble on account of independence. Yes, sir, I said, hurrying for the door. Thank you, sir. He raised his fingers to his lips in a last warning. Shh. Saturday, December 14th through Monday, December 23rd, 1776. The distress of the prisoners cannot be communicated in words. 20 or 30 die every day. They lie in heaps unburied, but numbers of my countrymen have died by cold and hunger, perished for want of the common necessaries of life. I have seen it. This, sir, is the boasted British clemency. Letter written from New York describing prisoners captured at Fort Washington. This quote tells me that prisoners are not being given the common necessities of life and that people are very upset by their ill treatment. However, the way the prisoners are being deprived of the common necessities of life reminds me of the way slaves are treated. I think the prisoners are being treated the same as slaves were treated. Page 232. Lady Seymour regained her strength by the day. I was no longer allowed to spend warm hours in her bedchamber. She took her breakfast and dinner alone, but joined the rest of the company for supper each night. Madame was saddened by her husband's aunt's return to health. The next week passed in a kitchen storm of flour and sugar, for Christmas was fast approaching. Madame's list of required delicacies was endless: gingerbread, pies of brandied peaches, and preserved cherries and mincemeat, macaroons, blancmange, not sure what that is, Jordan almonds, sugar candy, as many kinds of cakes as there were fingers on both hands. I was the dog's body in charge of keeping the oven stoked with wood and the ashes cleared out, fetching forgotten ingredients from the market and beating eggs 10 at a time till my arm was near to fall off. 2 of the soldier wives got into a terrible squabble the day the wood pile froze. Hannah told Mary it was her turn to fetch home the buckets from the tea water pump, and Mary said no, 'twas Hannah's turn. Back and forth they went, the words getting hotter as their tempers grew shorter. I went yesterday, Mary said loudly as she poured boiling water into a basin. You know that for a fact because you told me my nose was the color of a cherry when I came in. Hannah shook her head as she scrubbed the floor. No, 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 that was 2 days ago. Yesterday I slipped on the ice and fell on my backside, near broke my tailbone. I did. Could barely come up the steps this morning. You're a lying codface, you are, Mary said. Hannah threw the brush in the bucket and water splashed on the floor. Who you callin' a liar? Sarah, the boss lady, came through the door just as Mary rounded the table, her hands balled up into fists. Sarah was getting close to her time and had a bit of a temper herself. She slammed the door so hard the whole house shook. Shut your gob, she shouted. I'll report the pair of you to the colonel if you don't straighten up. There'll be no more brawling or caterwauling in this kitchen. But, they both said. Sarah leveled such a glare at the pair of them I thought their hair would catch fire, and I suddenly saw a way clear to my own purposes. Begging pardon, Miss Sarah, ma'am, I said meekly. What do you want? She said, her eyes still on the other women. I can fetch the tea water, I volunteered. Mary shook her head back and forth. Oh, no, she won't. She'll tear you up the shops to get out of her own chores. Make one of the men do it, I say. I'm the first one awake to build up the fires, I explained. The shops are still closed then. I'll dash up to the pump and be back before the sun comes up. Sarah gave me a suspicious look. Why would you take on extra work, special with it being so cold and dark in the morning? I was raised in the country, miss. Too much time inside makes me feel poorly. I like walking in the fresh air, even if it is cold. 'Twas mostly a lie, but the tea water pump was right close to the prison. Fetching water would give me a chance to check on Curzon every day. Hannah picked up her scrub brush and knelt on the floor again. Let her go, I say. Saves us the trouble of freezing our tails off. She dipped the brush in the bucket. Don't know what possessed me to follow my Jimmy to this godforsaken colony. The next morning found me headed up island long before the sun rose. When I knocked on the guardhouse door of the prison, it was opened by a soldier I'd never seen before, a short man with black hair, sky blue eyes, and a scowl. You can't come in, he said after I explained my errand. Regulations been changed. Tell her about the windows, called another soldier, warming himself by the fire. The regulations permit civilians to deliver food and sundry provisions. But not firewood, added the man at the hearth, yawning. But not firewood, repeated the first man. There will be regular patrols around the perimeter of the building to ensure that civilians do not tarry overlong in conversation with the prisoners. And we'll be checking on the grub you give them, said his companion. Guards will inspect all civilian donations, the first man said formally. If you deliver contraband items, you will be imprisoned yourself. Contraband is what they're not allowed to have. I shivered once. Are scones and jam contraband? Not yet. Back outside, I walked around the front of the building, trying to figure where Curzon's cell lay. Some prisoners were already awake, their hands and arms wrapped in rags sticking through the bars of the window.